What is up, everybody? Welcome back again to the uPOW podcast, your source for motivation, inspiration, and information on your own pursuits of wellness. As always, I'm Shawn.
And I'm Bailey.
And today we have a little bit of a meat and potatoes, quote unquote, and pun intended, podcast for you. We're really going to be diving into more of the structure and the breakdown of nutrition and nutrition science, kind of as the way that we see it. Quick disclaimer, if we really wanted to go down like a biochemistry rabbit hole or really talk about really advanced concepts and macronutrient timing and very specific populations and just more advanced stuff, we could definitely do that. And there's a space for that. So if anyone wants to do that, feel free to hit us up, slide in our DMs, do whatever you got to do to get a hold of us. We're down. We love doing that. One-off stuff is great. But today's episode is really going to be more for just kind of getting the information out there, explaining it, and putting it into terms with some examples of what people can actually do with it. So I hope that makes sense. I hope everybody's cool. And if you want to learn a little bit more about nutrition from a dietitian and a self-proclaimed nutritionist who really only works with bodybuilders, so I'm incredibly biased, then, stay tuned. I'm very excited to go down this rabbit hole. Bailey, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. And I'm excited to have this podcast too, because obviously this is essentially the profession and the topic I've dedicated my life's work to. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk about it on uPOW and really go at it from more of a wellness perspective. I think that's what obviously not only makes our company unique, but what will make this episode unique is learning how to implement this in the day-to-day, right? Because nutrition, in my opinion, it can actually be super dry, right? If you're not a science person, nutrition may not appeal to you. But I think having it explained in an applicable way completely changes the game for a lot of people. So I'm excited to have an opportunity to do that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and just a way that like you can apply, a lot of times it's like, well, you should eat this, this, and this. And it's like, yeah, bro, but have you ever had a Snickers? They're fire. So where does that fit in?
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Although, I want to call you out. Self-proclaimed nutritionist. Tell me a little bit about that one. I like your title. I just want to know more.
Self-proclaimed nutrition. I think it's really started with trying to learn how to do stuff. Whenever I was, honest to God, when I was 16, I wrote my first workout when I was 16. I was a power lifter at the time, which is hilarious to like brand yourself something you never really did. I competed in like 3 meets my whole life ever and got smoked at every one because I'm huge in terms of height. And in really like just trying to, I was always a big kid. And like, I've never been like, some people are like, oh, you're 300 pounds. Like that must be tough. And I'm like super comfortable at 300 pounds. I've always been 300 pounds. Like I've only been, when I was like near competition shape, if you want to call it that, I was probably like 220. And that was way harder than 300. 300 feels good compared to that. Like that felt horrible. I was tired all the time. Like don't feel like I was fueling properly. And I wasn't, that's just what it was. So the self-proclaimed nutritionist role is the same as the self-proclaimed, coach or guru, or, I think guru is probably the best thing to describe me, because it's all a little, it's a little rah-rah. But really, I think it comes from wanting to learn more, and it comes from people coming to me for information. And if people are going to come to you, you have a duty to put out good information. I think that's my biggest problem, I think, with a lot of people who compete one time in a show or diet down and lose weight, and then all of a sudden they're selling workout plans and they're I'm going to help all these people and do this stuff and buy my stuff, I did it, you can do it too. It's like did you learn anything along the way, like for the masses, or did you just do it one time anecdotally?
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things where like if people are going to ask me questions, I damn well better be able to back it up, and be able to walk the walk and talk the talk. So I think that's where the self-proclaimed nature came from. I don't have any certifications or anything, and even if I did, I mean, what does a certification in nutrition really matter? Especially to someone like you who has, 4-year degree, and you have a master's degree, and you had to do an internship, and you had to pass the state licensure board. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, actually you did, and very impressive, because most people do not know the backstory there. And obviously I've known you for a while now, so I can attest he is very knowledgeable in nutrition. So he's not just spewing facts. But no, it is interesting. And I like to kind of start off our conversation this way because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about nutrition. I mean, you can go on any
Definitely.
website, any social media account, any influencer, and you can find anything to support your point of view. And so I like to come at this and really tackle today's episode coming from the perspective of, and this is not to toot my own horn, but like the nutrition expert, right? That's what 4 years of college or 4 years of a bachelor's degree, a master's, state licensure, and continuing education hours, that's what it's going to get you. So I'm going to bring that side of the perspective, and hopefully, that appeases the crowds here. But I like to throw that out there because I think that's what makes our profession unique especially with a topic that, again, there's a lot of experts.
Yeah, experts with the quotes.
Air quotes.
Is great. Yeah, I think it's incredible how many people are trying to sell you something online and are trying to like, oh, do this fit tea or do this, buy this supplement or do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to lose so much weight. And it's like, I mean, it's almost like the diet fads, right? Like it's like, oh, well, do the carnivore diet. And it's like, okay, well, the carnivore diet, you're basically just going to cut out carbs, which is just calorie restriction. So a deficit, which you can do with literally anything. Like,
Yep.
I like think about the carnivore diet, and then I think back to this study I read in undergrad where they actually like had people eat chocolate cake for breakfast, and then they controlled the rest of the day's intake. And the people who ate chocolate cake versus the people that lost that skipped breakfast, the people that ate chocolate cake lost more weight. And I was like, oh yeah, well, I mean, you're causing an increase in calories in your metabolism first thing in the morning versus people who are staying in that fasted state longer, which
Yep.
flies in the face of intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, right there, I just said 3 or 4 different studies, so you can look all those up and draw your own conclusions.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
right, but to dig into this, I think the easiest way to explain nutrition and the way I've always done it is to go at it from a macronutrient perspective. Right? I think you would agree. Is that normally the way you go?
Typically, I mean, when it comes to education for like a client or an athlete, we basically need to start there because if you don't know your macros and the purpose of the macros, nutrition's not going to make sense to you. So that's typically where I will start. And then as needed, go into education on things like micronutrients and hydration and supplements. But yeah, I feel we need to start today's conversation off with going over the macronutrients and the purpose of them essentially.
Yeah, I agree. And macronutrients can lead into bigger conversations, and you can understand sort of energy balance, nutrient timing, setting up and structures and percentages and all the other stuff that can tailor it to you and make it bespoke. But you have to understand these underlying principles first. So I think it's a great spot to start. It's funny when looking at the notes, and Bailey did an awesome job putting the pre-writing together, and I just kind of made little snarky comments here and there.
Yes, you
So
did.
I think the it's funny that she started off with carbs as the first one, and I've never would have done that. I would have put protein first. So if that doesn't tell you the difference in how Bailey and I would do things, I don't know what will. But if we're gonna start off, let's go ahead and start off with carbs. There are 3 macronutrients. Let me preface this: protein, carbs, and fats. We're gonna kind of go through each one, chat a little bit through it, maybe do some, kind of dispel some of the misconceptions and provide a little bit of background information as well. Bailey, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Yeah. So like Shawn said, essentially there are 3 macronutrients, and those are carbs, fats, and proteins. And those are the actual nutrients that provide your body with energy, right? When you talk about vitamins and minerals and antioxidants, those don't actually provide usable energy. They're important for a number of reasons, but your body cannot convert those into ATP and fuel activity. So if you're looking for the actual caloric makeup of a diet, it's coming from carbs, fats, and proteins.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're looking at carbs first, the reason that I usually start here with a client is because according to the AMDR, it stands for Acceptable Macronutrient Distribution Range, they recommend that anywhere from 45 to 65% of your total daily calories actually come from carbs. So an easy rule of thumb, I say, is basically half of your calories, half your plate. For most people, again, we're not going into like specific diets here, specific medical conditions, just your average Joe Schmo. But we're looking at about 50% of your diet. And carbs is a very big food group. I think a lot of us are probably already aware of that, but foods that are carb rich would be anything like bread, oats, rice, quinoa, granola. Fruit falls under that category. Sweets fall under that category. I mean, I don't know about you, but like I've never met a carb I didn't like. So I'm very partial to the ones that are chocolatey, if we're being really honest here. Shawn, any favorites before I go on?
I used to mess with chocolate heavy, but chocolate has got milk in it. So I have been really it's funny that like the candy I used to go for was like Snickers or M&Ms or stuff like that.
Mhm.
Obviously, I mean, look at me. But here as of late, it's more of the Twizzlers or Sour Patch Kids or more of just the gummy stuff because it's like it's literally just sugar and
Yeah.
there's nothing else that's gonna mess with there's not a chance there's a weird peanut in there, there's not a chance there's a weird milk or in the nougat or something. So I actually like the simpler candies as I get older.
Funny. I feel like it normally goes the opposite way, but hey,
Yeah.
to each their own. If it doesn't make you feel good, it's not really worth eating. So, but yeah. Anyways, if we're going back to carbs, though, again, it's a very wide food group. There's a lot of different items in that category, and so generally we break them down into your simple carbs and your complex carbs. So your
Right.
simple carbs, right? This means like your sweets, right? So a few of the foods we just mentioned there. And essentially, it's a simple carb because your body breaks it down very quickly. There's really no fat or protein or other micronutrients in it. It's kind of straight sugar,
Mhm.
right? On the flip side, if you have your complex carbs, that's a source of carbs that has not only your sugars, but it also has some type of fat, fiber, and protein. And so these are items like your whole grains, right? So your brown rice, your whole wheat pasta, whole grain bread, etc.
Right. And they're also in terms of speed of uptake, in terms of the energy needed in order to absorb them. And again, I don't want to get too biochemy, but yeah, they're more complex molecules with the simple to complex, correct?
Correct. I mean, ultimately, all carbs, they're going to give you 4 calories per gram. So that doesn't really change between sweet and complex. But if you're looking at actually untangling like a source of whole grains that, again, has fiber, has protein, has fat, that's going to take longer to digest. It's not going to spike your blood sugar as quickly as like a simple carb would. And so for a lot of people, that becomes important, especially if we are dealing with somebody like, for example, who has diabetes or, another medical condition of that nature. So,
Right. And so an example of each, and there are some that kind of float the middle too. So like a simple carb, I mean, you're looking at something that's going to be very fast. It's going to get, there are enzymatic processes in the body that have to happen for it to be absorbed, right? It's not like you drink carbs and it goes directly into the muscle cells, right? Some of them are absorbed at the muscle cell, some of them are shuttled across the cell membrane into the mitochondria of the cell in order to create energy to be utilized. Other ones are dumped onto the liver because they can't be as readily absorbed into the muscle cell. And there are different shuttling processes for different carbs. And that's about as far as I think I'm allowed to go down the biochem rabbit hole for this podcast. But not everything is equal. To look at dextrose or even like a dehydrated dextrose, like a highly branched cyclodextrin or something else, like there are patented ingredients like dexanhydrous glucose, which are like really, really, really fast absorbing, high molecular weight forms of dextrose, which is a really, really fast sugar. Is there a difference between drinking HBCD, highly branched cyclodextrin, and eating pixie sticks after your workout? Well, I'd say the shape that Austin got into at his last contest probably would say no. So I think for most people, it's probably not that big of a deal. So we can kind of divide them into, okay, here's all your fast carbs. And then on the other end of it, you have your, dare I say, lower glycemic carbs, if we're going to talk about the glycemic index, where it does take longer. And because of that, they're not as good at spiking your insulin levels. Now, I said good, whereas most people are like, oh, I don't want that to happen ever. And it's like, well, you do want insulin to be released in your body at certain times and around certain windows, like workouts and
mhm.
times whenever you need more sugar for energy, like you're unloading trucks at your job or you're a construction worker, or really you're using your brain all day and you're and you're trying to get stuff done. There are times whenever you do want more carbs going into the muscle cells and and other tissues of your body to utilize them for sure. I
Yeah. And
think.
oh,
Go ahead.
well, I just wanted to jump in, but you said something really important here. Like carb intake drives energy production, right? That's your body's
Right.
preferred source of energy. It breaks down the quickest. However, the storage is not unlimited. You can essentially store an unlimited amount of fat in your body. But carb storage in your muscles and your liver is limited. So it takes that daily intake, and that is what your muscles and your brain use for energy. So if you're not consuming carbs, the two areas or the two organs that are most going to suffer upfront, it's going to be your brain and your muscle.
Right.
Which for a lot of people, especially again, those who are active, those who are working out, that's going to cause some real problems. So limiting carbs, again, for maybe the more active person is not typically a recommended, not typically a recommended practice.
Right. And the thing is, like, your body needs glucose. You can't just say, I'm not going to eat carbs and I don't have glucose. It's going to rip it from other sources through a process called gluconeogenesis. And we can talk about that a little more when we get into like protein and stuff. But for the most part, your body needs glucose, and it's going to get it, right? It needs fuel. It's like your car. Like, it's not going to run if you don't put gas in the tank. So what gas does your car want to use? The really good, clean burning premium, that's the simple carbs and they work really fast? Or does it want the regular gas that is your complex carbs? Yeah, it's probably going to run a little better on premium if you put it in at different times, or if you have racing, maybe a better analogy is racing fuel versus regular gas. I'm sorry. So if you're going to drive a race car, you need racing fuel. If you put regular gas in it, it's not going to run as well. I mean, your body's just like that. A race car is someone who's trying to work out, trying to be an athlete, trying to get performance out of the body. And if you're not doing that, I mean, there's no point in sucking down all that sugar all day long. I mean, if you have a sedentary lifestyle, essentially I've always referred to it as spill over. I'm sure, Bailey, you have a better way of saying it. But essentially, once you're at maximum storage for all of your glycogen stores in your body, everything else is just, your body's like, what do I do with this? I don't know, just we'll deal with it later. And deal with it later is a nice way of saying it stores it as fat, right?
Correctamundo. Which I think is why carbs get a bad rep. Yeah. Would you agree?
Definitely. It's crazy because, like, in my mind, fats are actually more easily stored as fat, but those don't get as bad of a rap as like sugar. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about, like, in the body, like, it's harder to convert glucose to sticking it into a fat cell to create more adipose tissue. Fat goes into a fat cell way easier. Fat finds fat. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't feel like it's the same, especially with the advent of the keto diet. And I was once talking to a buddy of mine about the keto diet, and this is way off topic, but he was saying that he felt the best whenever he kept olive oil next to his bed and he would just like take shots of olive oil. And I was like, that's entirely in your head. Like, there's nothing
placebo effect.
That's a real thing, dude. There's no way.
And his cholesterol levels are okay.
I don't even want to talk about it. But getting back to carbs, you said that the guidelines were what percentage again?
Roughly 45 to 65% of your total daily calories. I'd like to make it easy and just say 50%. It falls right there in the middle, and then obviously adjust for the individual. But
okay. So then what is it about carbohydrates that are so complicated, right? Like, it's I feel like they're the first one that get bastardized. They're the first ones, like, you got to cut out carbs, right? You see it in popular culture, you see it on the news, everywhere. It's just like, if you want to lose weight, you got to cut back your carbs. Why is it that it's carbs and not your protein or your fat?
Yeah, good question. My personal opinion on that is that, again, we have these two types of carbs, our simple and our complex. And I think simple carbs have become so readily available and just such a staple, at least in the American or the Westernized diet, that, people are over consuming them. They're surpassing that 45 to 65% of their day, and they don't even know it. Take, for example, a Starbucks drink, right? You go and you get like a white chocolate mocha or something, that can have upwards of like 30 or more grams of sugar. And that's crazy, given the fact that it's only one beverage. And so, we very quickly surpass that 45 to 65% range. And then people are wondering, well, why am I gaining weight? Or why am I developing insulin resistance? And ultimately, they've been bombarding themselves with sugar through pop, through sweetened coffees, through sweetened teas, through our convenient snack items, through desserts. And, it's not so much that carbs are bad, but we're consuming the wrong kind of carb, and we're consuming it all too frequently.
Right.
Again, not really speaking to the athlete here, but speaking to like the normal everyday person. And that's a problem that catches up with you from a health perspective.
Definitely. And I mean,
what are your thoughts on that?
I was going to say, I think people, you need carbs. I mean, like I said, your body's going to get glucose how it needs it. But I think, the advent of like, oh, well, I kind of got a headache. I haven't eaten all day. I'm going to pound this entire bag of potato chips or eat this entire bag of Twizzlers and I'm guilty of it for sure. But I think
Mhm.
the thing to think about with carbs is that they're not like in and out as fast as most people think. And I say most people, right? Like, let's go ahead and preface this by saying, if you are a very, very elite level athlete and you might be taking some exogenous hormones such as insulin or growth hormone or something like that, then yeah, you're going to rip through carbohydrates because your body's just building muscle tissue 24/7. That's just how it's doing it, right? And at the same time, like, let's use Bailey and I as an example, right? Bailey, you're what, 120 pounds? So I'm
Yep.
330 pounds. So my lean mass, like, even admittedly, I'm probably 25% body fat. My lean mass is probably, I think last time I got in the bod pod or did a DEXA, I think my lean mass was like 240, 250. So like,
That's
in
insane.
terms of skeletal muscle mass, like, yeah, I could probably store a lot more glycogen. I could probably synthesize a lot more protein. I can burn through a lot more stuff. Each step that I take is going to burn a little bit more glycogen than each step that you take, just because I'm three of you,
Yep.
right? But at the same time, we can still store energy the same way, right? We can still store glycogen.
Hmm.
We can, and glycogen is stored in various places, mostly in skeletal muscle, and we can still utilize that glycogen, and we can still both spill over, and we can, have too much. And the thing is, even despite everything I was just talking about, your body is really, really good and again, the normal person is really good at storing glucose, right? It's really good at storing glycogen. It's not like you're going to eat oatmeal in the morning and then you're going to be entirely hypoglycemic 3 hours later. If that's the way it was, I mean, humans would have died off years and years ago. Like, the first time it was like you went into starvation mode, you just die. Like, there's like, your body needs glucose to function. You would just literally just keel over. So
Hmm.
I think one of the biggest things is people think like, oh, I've been working out really hard. I need to replenish my glycogen stores. I need to do this, and if you listen to any, like, any popular fitness guru, whoever, especially those who are selling stuff to you, they'll tell you like, oh, you need post-workout carbs. You need to put, you need carbs pre-workout, intra-workout, post-workout, buy this drink and this is going to give you all the carbs you need. And it's like, homie, if you had pancakes for breakfast and you had French fries for lunch, you ain't got no business with some pre-workout carbs. Okay. It's full. That's what it is. You're dumping, like, imagine a cup full. You're just dumping stuff on top of it. Nothing's happening. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
there's maybe a little bit more hanging out in the blood, but I would be shocked if anyone, short of, again, someone who is doing a 3 hour high intensity interval training on a I don't know, a cycle ergometer, who is doing mad resistance and ripping through all their glycogen, like, short of, it is like absolutely insane. It's very difficult to completely deplete. Would you agree
Correct.
with that?
I would, and they have a term for it. It's sometimes if you're looking at a marathon runner, right, who's been running for a couple of hours, they have this phenomenon where they like collapse, right? They hit the wall. And that's essentially that moment when their body has run out of a usable substrate or it's run out of carbs. And so you don't see it happen often, right? Again, you're looking at the elite of the elite who experience this.
Right.
But again, there are benefits to having more carbs on board in a sense because they actually have somewhat of a protein sparing effect, right? If you're constantly training or constantly being active and you don't have enough carbs, well, again, like Shawn said, your body's going to find them from somewhere. So it's going to tap into your protein stores. It's going to tap into your fat stores. And while that may not be a bad thing, we don't really want it tapping into your protein stores or your muscle stores because that
Right.
then compromises health. It compromises performance, things we don't really want to mess with. So, and maybe that's a good segue into protein, but yeah, carbs
Yeah,
are your
it
friend.
definitely is. I was going to tell a quick story real quick
Oh
from
yeah, please do.
from Uncle Sean's bodybuilding days.
Oh boy.
So 90% of diet plans that I wrote for myself, I was a little more nice, I guess, to the people that I wrote them for. But when I wrote them for myself, I was like, I'm hardcore. This is how I'm doing it. It was 50% protein, 30% carbs, 20% fat most of the time. And it actually would drift towards like 50, 40, 10 protein, carbs, fats at times. I've never been a big fat guy. Well, obviously a big fat guy, but like I've never been big on fats.
Say
So
that.
because it was just one of those things where like fats can come from other sources, right? If you eat red meat, if you eat red fish, if
Mm.
you do X, Y, and Z, it's going to be pretty rare that you need, maybe you need to add some healthy fats, maybe some avocado, some nuts. But the people who are like, oh, I'm going to drizzle macadamia nut oil on all of my food sources and everything else, it's like, bro, do you really need that much fat? Like fat does like just a little bit of stuff. So, but we'll talk about that here in a second. But for the most part, it was literally 50, 40, 10, or it was 50, 30, 20, protein, carbs, fats. And I met a guy who actually is a registered dietitian. His name is Derek Beimel.
Mhm.
And Derek told me, like, essentially, you're wasting all of that protein. And I was like, you're full of it. I'm way bigger than you. Right. Because everything
But
went
he's
back.
right.
I was like, everything goes back to how big my arms are. I'll remember that next time I'm smaller than you. So, all the douchey things you say. So
Mhm.
it took me a long, long time to finally make the realization that he was totally right. I'm not eating enough carbohydrates to sustain. I mean, at that time I was probably, 270 to sustain 270 pounds, 240 of which is lean mass. So it's like you're essentially eating protein as your carb source, as dumb as that sounds. And it's like, for a college kid, carbs are cheap.
Yeah.
I'm out here
Oh
buying
yeah.
chicken breasts and working 3 jobs at a time trying to afford some ground beef just so I can use it as what I could have gotten out of pasta. So I think
Basically.
the protein sparing effect of carbohydrates for energy cannot be, touted enough, especially to people who are trying to improve their body composition. Carbohydrates get demonized straight out of the gate. Cut the carbs out, don't eat carbs, keto diet all the way. It's like, okay, cool. So all that expensive meat and those expensive fats, especially if you get the healthy fats, like you're now using those as your carbs. Like,
Right.
congrats. you know so just eat the damn carbs. Okay. Yeah,
We
me and
should.
Bailey will go back and forth on the percentages all day. I've since changed. I don't feel like it's 50, 30, 20 protein, carbs, fats anymore. So I'm still I've gone the other way, folks. You heard it here first. but
My life's work is complete. Um, yeah, no, and the last thing I'll say on that too is again, cutting carbs often is not the answer. It's typically changing up the quality, right? So if we're worried that you're eating too many simple carbs, well, let's switch it for a complex. Change your white rice to brown rice. Change your wheat or change your white bread to wheat bread. Like
mhm.
you can improve the quality and of the carb that you choose. And that way you're not just getting these like really simple sugars, you're also going to be getting adequate amounts of fat, fiber, and protein too. So that's typically the route I would recommend somebody go. Again, we may have cases where we need to decrease it, but often it's changing the quality, not necessarily the quantity.
Right. No,
I
I
hope that
agree.
makes sense.
And one of the, I'm still a big fan of like carb cycling, for example. It's kind of an old school thought, but for me, if I carb cycle, it's entirely based on like, calorie restriction. Because
Mm.
for me, it's really easy to weigh out, okay, I normally do 2 cups of white rice. I'm going to do 1 cup of white rice for 2 days. And then I'll go back to 2 cups of white rice. And that's how I'm going to pull a little bit of calories, give a little calories back, pull a little calories, give a little calories back. And I
Sure.
just fall into that rhythm because that's the way I've always done it. But I'm not trying to restrict it because carbs are bad. And that's the enemy and everything, it's more so like, hey, that's a simple way to do it. I know how to do it. So if you ever catch me talking about carb cycling on the show, it's not because of carbs are the enemy. It's because of everything we just said. But we're not going to beat a dead horse. Let's keep it moving. Let's roll right into protein. Bailey, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, definitely. Protein's one of the other macronutrients we already talked about. And protein actually is a very diverse macronutrient and it has a ton of different roles in the body. But generally, the three biggest ones that I would educate somebody on is it's needed for muscle growth, right? And muscle maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
It's needed to actually provide cell structure, which obviously from head to toe is something that is important for all types of body tissue. And then lastly, it also contributes to immune function. So proteins, I think often they're like shorted, right? Like we only think about them in relation to muscle growth, but
Mm-hmm.
underneath the skin, there's a lot of other benefits and a lot of other uses for proteins and amino acids, which maybe you want to speak to a little bit, but amino acids are essentially the building blocks of a protein structure. So if you want to kind of take the lead on that one, you can.
Yeah, so amino acids, if you break them down, there's like 20 something, depending on, we can argue past 20. They essentially are the base level of protein, and different proteins have different amino acid profiles. Amino acids form branch chains and polypeptide strains, and they finally form, building blocks, and then eventually they form complete proteins based on where you're getting protein from. And we're going to dig into complete versus incomplete proteins a little bit here, but for the most part, I think branched chain amino acids, people think they are more easily broken down than protein is, and to a certain extent they are, because they're just a little bit more, a little bit further down the chain. I mean, eventually you're going to get to the same spot because they're going to have to combine with the other stuff in order to form the full protein blocks and go where they need to go. Most of the time it's a skeletal muscle or the liver. If it's in the skeletal muscle or in what's called an extrahepatic tissue, there's some other things that have to happen with it. But for the most part, the simplest way to do it, protein is the base layer of building muscle, the base layer of repairing muscle. And it's one of those things that the body really cannot function without. And if you don't get enough protein in, or if you're in a situation where you don't consume animal protein, being protein deficient is a very, very bad thing.
Mhm. Which, to follow up on that, it is interesting because protein, again, if we're looking at like the AMDR ranges, essentially, it's only anywhere from 10 to 35% of your total daily calories. That is more than enough to keep the average person very healthy. You
Mhm.
may have a few exceptions to that, again, depending on like body size, goals, medical conditions. But actually, in the US, like we often overconsume protein. It's
Mhm.
pushed very heavily by the marketing industries, by the health industries, by the supplement companies. The reality is most people can get all of the protein they would need in a day just through whole foods if it was spaced out between, 3 meals, 1 or 2 snacks throughout the day. So I always find it interesting because it's so popular, but people actually have no idea what their average needs are.
Right.
Another way to estimate it for most people would be, again, if you're a relatively active person, is going to be 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Yeah.
So,
I've definitely, definitely done it that way before too. And
yeah.
protein is another one of those things. It's funny you talked about, breaking it up across 3 meals throughout the day, and this is kind of light bulb went off in my head.
Mhm.
There is such thing as like a free amino acid pool in the body, correct?
Mhm.
So you kind of have this buildup, and then, you can go into nitrogen retention, and you can go to protein synthesis level and where you're at. But for the most part, and most people, depending on how big you are, you can kind of get a lot of your protein in at a couple meals and be okay, and it's going to be there, and your body's going to use it as it needs it. You don't have to have this massive protein spike pre and post workout. I mean, yeah, maybe I'm a little biased, and I think post workout, whenever you've ramped up all your metabolic processes, yeah, I think you can absorb a little bit more stuff. But I'm not saying that you got to get 500 grams of protein as soon as you're done working out either.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I did want to talk about for sure today is sort of the timing of feedings or the timing of meals, right?
Mhm.
Because for most people can eat 3 meals a day, get all their protein in, they're good to go, right? And as you
Yeah.
get bigger and larger, or your muscle mass gets bigger and you're trying to put on more muscle mass, like obviously the amount of protein that you need goes up. So it makes it harder to get it in at those 3 meals. So you see people advocating for, oh, you got to eat 6 meals a day. You got to eat 8 meals a day, 10 meals a day. What is your opinion on that? Because I've got my opinion. So I want to know what yours is before I kind of throw my bias out there.
Yeah. No, my opinion, I think the three standard meals a day, I think that works for most people.
Mhm.
I do think you need to use snacks though. Most of us don't want to go more than like 4 hours without having something to eat. And generally at each of those feedings, there should be an adequate source of protein. And
Mhm.
so the exact number of grams is probably going to vary, again, depending on who you are and what your goals are. But if we're doing, like, for example, a breakfast, a lunch, an afternoon snack, and a dinner, and we've got protein at all four of those feedings, that works for a lot of people. I actually find it's when people skip those meals that they then go to make bad decisions at the next meal because they're over hungry, they're tired, they're stressed, they're no longer sticking to like normal portion sizes. So there's something to the smaller and more frequent meals.
Yeah.
Would love to
And
hear your insight though.
so my thought was it goes back to a few different things. And one of them being, there are hormones that happen with hunger and satiety, or hunger and fullness. And if you go too long without eating and you're eating one massive meal and then you go all day long and you eat one massive meal before bed, you're probably going to be pretty hungry by the time you get to your second meal. And those hormones in your gut, are going to start kind of going, and leptin and ghrelin, and we can go down this rabbit hole if you guys will hit us up later. I'm not going to go that far. So if those hormones in your gut are starting to like just really, really drive you crazy, there's the mental aspect of it and trying to get to the next meal. There's the hormonal aspect of it. And then for me, it always went back to, how does this meal make me feel?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's because, I'm a guy who, let's take let's just do quick math, right? So 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, I'm about 150 kilos. So that's 300 grams of protein. I've eaten between 300 and 500 grams of protein for probably the past 10 years. That's just sort of,
500?
yeah, I've been up to 500 before. It's not,
Oh my gosh.
that's
How
not fun.
did you even do that? Sorry, now we
Lot
need to go
of,
down the rabbit hole because that's a lot of protein. Like,
that's,
just for reference, like 3 ounces of a chicken breast is like 21 grams of protein, right? One egg has 6 grams of protein. So my guy, how did you get 500 grams of protein in one day?
that was like, I want to say like 14 egg whites in the morning, and then 10 ounces of meat 4 times. So like it was like chicken, beef, something else, but 10 ounces each time, and 9 scoops of whey protein.
9.
Yeah, because I had 3 shakes, 3 scoops each. So 75 grams of protein at each shake, in
You
addition to
needed a dietitian.
the other 5 meals.
You needed a dietitian.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you did.
I was strong though, buddy. I was strong. It was probably because I was just absolutely oversaturated in all aspects of my life. Actually, and you can call Trey and I'll wait. There were days where we did cheat meals and cheat days, and the carbohydrates were on top of that 500 grams of protein. Like we were up near 1,000 grams of carbs on top of that, which is just absolute insanity. Like you're talking about like
That's
boxes.
4,000
Yeah,
calories
100%.
just from carbs.
Yeah, 100%. Like boxes of Pop-Tarts, like plural.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
you know,
it was sickening. It honestly was. I don't even want to think about it.
this
How
just
did we
makes
get
me
here?
so
What were we
glad you
even
care
talking about?
about wellness now, right? Because we
Right.
don't
Yeah.
do that anymore.
You get out of that and you start getting into this other stuff. Yeah.
When you realize it's not sustainable.
How did we get here? What was I talking about?
We're talking about protein and like
Protein.
meal scheduling, and how you were talking about maybe not having like one massive overindulgent meal a day.
Right. So I think where a lot of this, like eat multiple meals a day and all this stuff, a lot of people say like, oh, it increases your metabolism. And yeah, there's probably an argument for that, but it's not as much as people think. I don't think. And I mean, do you feel?
No, I just don't think it really changes that much. Like, sure, there can be some variance, but it's
Right.
not going to be a 500 calorie difference for most people,
Right.
It might be like a 50.
So for me, what I I literally just said, I had 5 solid meals and I had 3 shakes. One of the shakes was like first thing in the morning before I had the eggs and I did morning cardio. One of the shakes was after training. One of the shakes was right before bed, and then I had those 5 meals, on top of it. I had to space that out because like if you don't have 5 meals, like let's just cut it in a quick math, cut it in half, right? Like I'm gonna eat 20 ounces of meat, 25 ounces of meat at one sitting. Like that's not gonna happen. There's no possible way I was going to do that. Now, should I have been doing that anyway? No. But I think in my mind, there like 1 is too little, 10 is too many, right? So like what's going to be the best for you and your performance, right? If you're a person like, man, I just, around 2:30 every day, I'm just really, really hungry. Like, cool, eat a snack. Like who says you can't eat at 2:30?
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest things that Lauren and I did, just for me personally, was I would get home from work and she would go to the gym or go do something else, or she'd be taking the dog to training or something like that, and we wouldn't eat dinner until a little bit later. I just wouldn't eat. I was just like, all right, cool, I'll just wait on her. And we wouldn't eat till like 7 o'clock some days, and like by 7 o'clock I am, oh my god, hangry, starving, like about ready to punch a hole in the wall, like, or just order a pizza. I don't even care at this point. And it's like, why wouldn't you just eat at like 4:30 when you got home? Like eat something small, have a snack. Now you're held over. Now we can have that normal healthy dinner that we were going to cook, right? So
Yes.
I think it gets a
That's just
bad rap.
music to my ears.
See, I'm doing stuff. I'm trying.
I love it. Yeah.
But I think it's just, you got to find what's good for you. And I think whenever, I've had clients in the past, or if we're going to offer something in the future, shameless plug, I think it's going to be very tailored in nature and very bespoke too. I mean, what are you comfortable with? Do you like to work out in the mornings? Do you like to work out in the afternoons? Do you like to work out at night? How many meals a day do you like to eat? Are you I gotta have a Diet Coke at 2:30 kind of person? Lord, I've been there. So it's like, what can we do to make it fit for you? Because in my mind, one of the best diets you can be on, and we're kind of going left here, one of the best diets you can be on is a diet you can stick to, right?
That's so good. Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. I don't even want to follow that. That was good.
Yeah. Just to wrap up protein, I mean, I think
I think we have one more like little topic on protein though, and we need to throw it out here because like plant-based diets are very popular right now. And one of the concerns with plant-based diets, so vegetarian or vegan,
I think this is exactly where I was going. I hope you're going right where I was going to go.
Perfect. Yep, perfect. Cool. But yeah, something that we want to make sure that we educate people on is that like not all protein is created equal. All right. So you have your complete proteins versus your incomplete proteins. And the difference between those two is that one actually contains all 9 essential amino acids. The incomplete proteins, they're going to have a variety of the essential amino acids, but they typically do not have all of them together. Mm-hmm. And so how that plays into plant-based diets is if you are not eating meat, fish, eggs, milk, you're missing out on those sources of complete protein. So you have to be a little more strategic and figure out how to pair your incomplete proteins together to get a substantial meal that is rich in the protein that your body needs. So I'll turn it back over to you, but wanted to make sure we got that in there first.
Okay. So I'm going to have a wolf of wellness moment here. I apologize for everybody.
Oh boy.
If it didn't have a face, a mother, a soul, that's not protein. Okay. I'm sorry. Like we wouldn't climb to the top of the food chain to eat grass. Okay. I'm sorry. Be mad at me all you want. Plant-based community. My bad. Okay. But you're going to have to jump through so many more hoops to get the same amount of protein, right? One of my favorite athletes right now is a vegetarian. And every day she comes in my office, she's like, Big Shawn, she's taller than me. Big Shawn, I got 190 grams of protein in yesterday. I'm like, was it real protein or was it junk protein? Tell me honestly. And she's always just like, what do you mean junk protein, bro? And I'm like, dude, just because it says 3 grams of protein on it does not necessarily mean it's 3 complete grams. You have to kind of,
your body can utilize all of those either or absorb them all. So,
right. Because if you get, let's say you ate 190 grams of protein from, I don't know, give me something, beans, right? Sure. They're not a complete protein.
Correct.
Right. So you ate 190 grams of protein from beans throughout the day. Number one, how bad does your stomach hurt? You didn't really get 190 grams of protein unless you also had whatever goes with that particular bean to create a complete protein source and give you those 9 essential amino acids to create a complete protein.
Yeah. And often we don't really have the information to make that like precise of an assessment, like I don't know of any papers and if you guys know of any, send them my way, please. But like, I've never seen anyone dissect a bean and like tell me exactly what amino acids are in it in what quantity. Now, somebody may have done it and I haven't seen it, but ultimately
it's tough. Yeah. I actually, it's funny. The USDA actually came to IU and when I did my master's degree here under Joel Steger, and there was a funded study that was like, let's look at beef versus other, because beef was under fire from the media for whatever at the time. Yep. And beef was under fire. And they're like, no, do some research with beef and see if it's better for muscle and protein and blah, 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 because of its unique amino acid profile. And literally like the smartest people I ever met in my life looked around this room and they go, does beef have a different amino acid profile than chicken? Like we assume it does, but does anyone know that? Like we can't write something that says that. Like we don't know.
Yeah. There's a lot of unknowns. But I think the one thing we can take away is that we do know, again, complete versus incomplete. Your animal sources are always going to give that to you. And that's true for like your dairy products as well. So like your cow's milk versus your plant-based milk. Plant-based milk is water, right? And then whatever else they've decided to add to it, like calcium or vitamin D or protein. And again, even the protein in that is not going to be a complete
Mm-mm.
protein 99% of the time. So I think for
Right.
people who really want to optimize their protein intake, including animal sources would be like the best way to go.
Yeah, I
My
would agree.
opinion on that one. So
And my joke earlier about like other protein can be protein. I don't hate vegetarians. Like I just said, one of my favorite athletes is a vegetarian. I just think it is, you are at a disadvantage, I feel like, in terms of if you're going to be a strength-based athlete, for example, it's
mhm.
the guy who's going to go back and eat a 12-ounce steak after he works out. He's got an advantage over you, That's just how it is.
Yeah.
You have to work a little bit harder. And if you're cool with that, cool. I respect you and I respect you know, your choice to not eat baby cows. You know what? Good on you.
Yeah.
I think I could probably tell like about 500 more like protein stories, but they're all going to get really like bad really fast. And you're just going to be sitting there shaking your head at me. So let's go ahead. Let's get out of protein. I feel like we've been talking about it forever. Let's roll into our final macronutrient for those of you who've been counting along at home. And that is fat.
Fat gets the worst rap out of all of them. That and carbs.
I think
They're
carbs
kind
get a worse rap than fats. I really do. Like
I
since
think
the
now,
introduction to
10
the
years
keto
ago,
diet.
no.
No, I agree. Like when Atkins was around, that dude hated carbs.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But yeah, if we're looking at dietary fat, this is the most energy dense of the three macronutrients. So it actually contains 9 calories per gram.
Mhm.
So you're going to be getting a lot more bang for your buck in terms of, again, energy storage. But it does have some roles. Catch my drift there. It's got many different roles in the body, a few of which include insulation, right? So you actually do need a certain amount of body fat to protect your internal organs and to protect you as a person. But then it also serves as your long-term energy storage, again, in case of some extreme event like starvation or whatnot. And then it plays a role in hormone production too. So it does a few other things as well, but those are typically the 3 big ones that people ought to know about. And I guess where it gets tricky is that there are a lot of different types of fat. Typically, I break them down into 4 categories for people, but you have your saturated fats, your trans fats, your mono unsaturated fats, your polyunsaturated fats. And I think that's where most people get lost, is that none of it makes a lot of sense
Right.
to individuals that do not have a science background. And that's okay. Like, no shame. Most people don't want to take the time to learn that. And I get that. Biochem was one of my least favorite classes, and it had a lot to do with fat. So organic chemistry, not my friend. But and so we can dive into any of those, all of those. Shawn, is there something you want to start on here?
Yeah, I mean, let's do it, because when I think about fats, I mean, you're starting to think about like the number of carbon atoms and the number of bonds and the number of, again, because I mostly look at it from the biochem, dun dun
Yeah.
dun, from that side. So I think it's important to understand that just because you see something, and I think it doesn't, the FDA, that doesn't have to say like amount of fat and amount of saturated fat now.
Yep. Yeah, it'll
So
always tell you how much fat, saturated fat, and then trans fat actually has been like banned by the FDA, and it's being
really,
phased out of all of our foods because they know now how negatively or how much of a negative impact it has on health. And while initially they thought it was going to be okay, like the studies show that it's not. So by I think
right.
it's 2023 maybe. I mean, you should never see trans fat on the label after that.
Right. Because fats have different functions in the body, right? Like we've talked about how protein, is for immune function, immune support, building blocks of muscle, at different phases and different levels. It can actually, you can use gluconeogenesis to create, glucose from it. Carbohydrates are just straight up energy. That's that rocket fuel. Burn everything you can. That's the stuff that your body wants to burn. Fats are a little bit different. They are in my mind, they are a stored source of energy, right? Because your body sees fat, cool, I'll deal with that later, right? And like I said before, fat readily converts to fat because it is fat. So I think it's stored in the body pretty readily. And again, maybe I'm a little biased here, but I think the big things with fats are creating cell walls in certain tissues and also hormone regulation. especially in people who are in, more of growing phases and, need good fats for regulating certain hormones in the body. And, it's, I think once you hit a certain level of fat and you can meet the minimums of those three things, like, and it's really tough for me to say you need more and more and more and more fat unless you're deficient in another area and you're going to pull from fat to use as energy source, for example. I think once you've kind of checked the boxes of, cellular, structure and, cellular, and I don't want to say rigidity, but you know what I'm saying? Like cellular
Yeah.
strength of the cell membrane walls and, hormone function, everything is normal. For me, I think fat after that is sort of not necessarily useful. But at the same time, getting to those check marks has to happen with certain types of fat, right? So you couldn't do it all with trans fats, because even if you hit your fat number, you're still not going to get the hormone regulation out of it. You're still not going to get the benefits to the cell membranes. It's really, I mean, trans fats essentially just get stored, right? If you don't burn them right then and there, correct?
Correct. And they honestly, like, they're even hard to clear from the blood. Like, that's the type of fat that tends to clog up your arteries and whatnot. So yeah, it's really hard to digest. It's hard to break down. And so that's why they're stored, because you really cannot get rid of trans fats. So people over time who consume a lot of them, yeah, as far as adverse health outcomes go, trans fats tend to be a big culprit. So
Right. So what about saturated fat? What's the difference between trans fat? Because saturated fat gets bad rap too. So what's the difference between saturated fat and trans fat?
yeah, and don't get me wrong, saturated fat is not great for the body either. Similarly to trans fat, it's really hard to digest. It's going to contribute to like clogged arteries, if you will, and it's going to negatively impact your blood lipid levels. So like your cholesterol, it's going to raise LDLs, VLDLs, that kind of thing. So, but the difference is mainly structural. So I guess we do have to go into like a little bit of biochem here. But essentially saturated fats, if you look at that carbon chain, they have no double bonds. All right. And that's ultimately, from a health standpoint, that's not a good thing. You want the carbon chains to have one or more double bonds. From a digestibility standpoint, that's a really good thing. So saturated fats, they don't. Food sources of saturated fats, think of the foods that are like solid at room temperature: Crisco, butter, lard. That's how you know the fat is saturated. There's really no room for like water or air. It is just like a clump of fat, basically.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Trans fats, on the other hand, they do have one double carbon bond, double bond there. But the interesting part is that the hydrogen ion, I'm saying that right? Hydrogen ions, essentially they're on opposite sides of one another. And so again, from a structural standpoint, that makes it really hard to break down. Your body cannot digest it, get rid of it, etc.
Right.
They both have negative outcomes, but just structurally, they're actually built differently. So that's what I would say is the largest difference maker between the two.
Yeah. I should have looked it up. I really should have, but I did read a study one time that said saturated fats could be more beneficial to the hormone regulation side, but trans fats were essentially just worthless. So it's like,
more or less,
maybe that's why they're not as bad and they're not outlawed like trans fats are going to be, but they're still, in terms of the, like you said, you broke it down to 4 fats. In terms of the 4 fats, those two, let's just go ahead and put them in the quote unquote bad category, right? Like they're not going to benefit your HDL or LDL, your lipid profile, or anything like that. We don't gotta get into blood work on this one. We can talk about that on another episode. We'll bring on, an MD or something that's way smarter than me to chat about that. But I think let's go ahead and put those two into the bad category. So let's talk about the good fats now.
Sure. So the third one that I mentioned was your monounsaturated fatty acids. We can basically abbreviate that as like a MUFA. I don't know. That's just what we always call them. You got your MUFAs and your PUFAs. I know I got to keep this PG. But MUFAs also
good. I haven't had one F-bomb this time. I've been really focused.
Did you want to round
be proud of your boy?
I kind of am. Anyways, but yeah, so these MUFAs have a carbon-carbon double bond, and they are on the same side. Basically, again, those hydrogen atoms on the same side. And these are the fats that are going to be like liquid at room temperature for the most part. So a few food sources that you are probably familiar with would be like avocados, olive oil, canola oil, almonds, peanuts. often categorized as like the good healthy fats, right?
Right.
And then on the flip side, you have your polyunsaturated fats, your PUFAs, and those have one or more, they have more than one double bond. And so again, these are kind of the best of the best, if you will, also often liquid at room temp. But really good sources of PUFAs would be like your fatty fish. So your salmon, tuna, mackerel, also found in some plant-based sources like walnuts, sunflower seeds, what else? Flax. So yeah.
Okay. And how much, I mean, I've kind of already said how I feel about it, right? I think there's sort of a threshold of fat where it's useful, and
Mm-hmm.
it's useful for sort of X, Y, and Z. Beyond that, I think it's like, again, if you're going to say like, okay, well, you could use it as energy, like, well, why don't we just put a little bit more into carbohydrates and get us closer to that magical 50% number that you like to have? Why don't we put a little bit more there where we can use it as a more readily available source of energy? Then maybe we could debate that a little bit, but I guess what is I think you put in the notes 25% was what you would recommend.
Yeah, the ranges are generally 20 to 35% based on like preference, lifestyle, et cetera. But 25% is again kind of an easy breakdown and a good starting place for most people, because there are essential fats that you need. Again, like it is needed for a lot of roles in the body.
Yeah.
But we prioritize trying to choose a source of, again, like the MUFA or the PUFA. I'm going to keep saying it because I know you don't like those words, but I'm going to keep saying it. We want to prioritize.
Try not to laugh.
We want to prioritize getting fat from those types of sources versus your saturated fats.
Right.
So a really easy example, but like if you're going to go to a restaurant and get a typical like American meal, burger, fries, pop, dessert, right? That is fried in grease. That is a saturated fat. So all the food that you're getting on your plate, really there's not any health benefit to that fat. There's only like a health detriment. Where on the other hand, if you were getting a grilled chicken sandwich and you were getting a baked potato and you were getting a salad with sliced avocado or in a vinaigrette dressing, right, that it's still fat, but it totally changes the health benefits, the health profile, the fat profile. So that's kind of the recommendation. That's the route we encourage people to go there.
Okay. And okay. So question, let's say, and I can even give you an example. All right. So my grandmother Ruby, so my mom's mom, my birthday, her birthday, Jesus' birthday, my house, her house, the Lord's house, she gonna have bacon and eggs for breakfast, right? So I'd say her diet probably has higher than 25%. Let's say it has 35% fat. Where are you pulling that 10% from?
What do you mean? Sorry, pulling the 10% from?
Where you if it has to add up to 100%, right? So if say the calories are the same, where are you going to pull that 25% from? Protein, from carbs, 5 from each? What are you thinking?
Probably a split. Yeah, I'm not sure I guess without knowing more, it'd be kind of hard to say one or the other, but I think you can take from a little bit from both. And also, like, we know that your diet's not totally going to be static. Like there are going to be days when you blow these ranges out of the water, and that's okay. I mean, really, we're looking for like 80% compliance. If you can make the right dietary choice 80% of the time and then have fun 20% of the time, I mean, that's already a huge improvement for most people. Yeah. So, if you can start there and aim for that, like, my God, a lot of people would be in really great shape and have a really great diet. And I can say I fully abide by the 20%. Like, I love my 20% of fun food, right? Some of my favorites, you already know, I love chocolate, I love red wine, and I love pizza. Sometimes I like them all together. So it's okay to do that. But the other times I am making the right choices with my diet because I know long-term that's what I need to accomplish my goals. So.
Yeah, definitely. And actually goals is a good thing to talk about, because I think we could probably sort of wrap this up on macros. I'd like to talk about water as well before we go.
Yeah.
But I think we could wrap this up on macros. We can dive into micronutrients and sort of where your body needs to be, because that's going to delve into supplements a little bit too. So we're actually going to put that, I'm going to go ahead and make an executive decision to say we're going to put that in a different podcast, especially we've been going about an hour now too. So I think we can cover that in a different episode. But I do want to talk about goals, because your goals will dictate some of your diet in terms of calories and everything else. Now, I'm not saying I want to get huge and eat 10,000 calories, right? Like that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying, based on, lose, maintain, gain, your diet is going to change. And you know, in my world, the number of calories would change, and also the composition of the macronutrients would change. So I guess let's talk about goals a little bit, and sort of what you like to like to structure plans around those things.
Yeah. Well, you've heard me say it several times, but I'm a big fan of the SMART goals. And
Mhm.
so if you haven't seen other episodes, you want your goals to be specific. You want them to be measurable, attainable, realistic, time measured. You know, if your goal can't be those things, it's probably not a very good goal. And so we need to make sure that we're setting goals that are following that criteria,
Mhm.
because that's what helps somebody be successful. You don't want to use a general goal of, you know, I'm going to lose 5 pounds this week. It's maybe instead your goal is, no, I'm going to eat a balanced lunch that includes at least 20 grams of protein, 1 scoop or 1 cup of a whole grain carb, and 1 vegetable to
Right.
further my weight loss. You know, maybe I will do this religiously for 1 month. So you want goals to really be that laid out. And that helps keep you accountable. That helps you remember them. That helps you plan for them.
Right. And so if I tell you like my goal is to, you know, maintain muscle mass, but I want to lose weight, right?
Mhm.
So you're going to create a diet, right? And you're going to obviously, you know, do all the magical and wizardry stuff that you do to establish whatever the baseline, you know, what's called basal metabolic rate, if anyone wants to do a quick Google search. And then you're going to calculate daily caloric needs based on, you know, energy level and all that stuff. And then you're going to either go right at that number, go above that number, go below that number, right? That's the same thing I would do.
Yep.
Would you also change the composition and the percentage of each macronutrient at that point?
I would. If someone specifically does want to decrease body fat, I will often decrease their carb intake. And that probably sounds a little contradictory considering what I just said. But
Everything
when
we
I
just said.
say, but when I say decrease their carb intake, I'm talking about the lower end of that designated range. So I'm still thinking 45%
Mhm.
of their total calories. And again, for the average person, that is more than sufficient to meet their needs. And so I would often start there, and I may increase protein a little bit, again, usually sticking within the range, but I may go to the higher end of that range, like 35%.
Mhm.
And then fat, I would probably keep on the low to moderate end. So if that was the specific question I was asked. So
Nice.
we'd look at including like your high quality complex carbohydrates, your lean sources of protein, your healthy fats.
Right. So that's so interesting because I would not. I would have,
What would you do?
I
If
would
I said,
essentially,
Shawn, I wanted to like lean out a little bit, get like muscle on my bod on, what am I doing?
well, again, so you got to take it with a little bit of grain of salt, right? Because I'm biased. Because
Mhm.
for the most part, I'm going to look at training and I'm going to look at energy
Mhm.
expenditure and how I can actually get the most out of you, right? So I've got to look at it from a fueling standpoint. I've got to look at it from a, okay, how much are we going to put in the tank so that I can have enough in the tank to kill her when we get to the gym, right? So it's
Yep.
like if we're going to build some muscle, you're going to have a decent amount of protein, right? If we're going to build some muscle, you're going to have a decent amount of carbs for energy, right? If we're going to build some muscle, it's like I've already got protein, I've already got energy, right? So I've got building blocks, I've got matter to work with, and I've got energy to drive that matter. You know, for me, I'm probably going to pull from fat, and I'm probably going
Mhm.
to pull it down to where I think, again, like I think there's an acceptable minimum. You know, it could be, I don't know, I'm trying to think what is the general rule of thumb I usually use. It's like could go up to like two, that's way too high. I think down to like zero point 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, right? So like for me again,
Mhm.
about 150. The lowest we could probably go is about 75. But if we started off at 100, it's like the first calories I'm taking are going to be those 25 grams of fat, right?
Gotcha.
And if we need to
Yep.
pull a little more calories, okay, cool. Now we can start pulling some carbs. I'm probably not going to pull from protein. And
Mhm.
again, like that's probably not the way to think about it, but in terms of like if I'm thinking about like putting on muscle mass or maintaining muscle mass while also trying to strip body fat out, that's probably the way that I would go about it. And I would also probably try and play with it day to day. And, you know, some days you get a little more carbs, some days you get a little less carbs and try and the main thing I would really do is try and regulate whenever you're doing low intensity steady state cardio versus high intensity interval cardio. And, you know, if there's a chance that we could actually deplete those glycogen stores all the way to zero, we're going to make sure that, you know, the next day we're really refilling. And maybe there's a lot of bro science and a lot of stuff I just said, sure, but it's also like never not worked. So not to toot my own horn.
Has it worked more than like for a year? And I don't mean that like as shade. I just mean like for a high
I caught the
intensity plan
shade
and a
though.
high.
I'm not sure I
I
liked your
mean,
tone the way you said that.
there's a little, but I just mean like, are those plans you would follow for a year? Because again, what's the best plan? The plan you can stick with.
Right. Those were typically for like a contest prep scenario.
Gotcha.
So if we're going to try and put a guy into a contest for powerlifting, bodybuilding, whatever we're going to do, that would typically be like a set structured plan. And then, there's ways of, you can call it refeeding, you can call it rebounding, you can call it essentially you build it down, get ready for the competition, you build it back up after the competition, right? And then there's peaking and stuff that happens during the competition week. And I hate to say peak week, but there's certain things you do to make sure you're loaded and you're ready for the competition. But then afterward, it's like, I mean, I can tell you straight up, like Austin, after his last competition, like that might have been the grossest thing I've ever seen, when my dude went to Outback and he ate everything, like loaves of bread, like all the food, like everything. And his stomach
But he got
stuck.
sick.
I'm telling you, his stomach stuck out probably a good 6-8 inches. And then he had abs and veins on top of that, because it was just literally just so much stuff jammed against the abdominal wall. It was so distended. I was just like, yeah, we need to slowly build back to that higher into that calorie range. And that's, for me, that's always how I've justified it as being sustainable. Now, obviously, sitting back a couple years removed from bodybuilding, I can definitely say, unless you're going to diet specifically for a competition, I think that is the extreme way of doing it. I mean, that's taking it to the wall. That's not a lifestyle. That's not wellness. That is, I'm dieting for X reason, right?
Yeah.
Which
That's
is why I think it's
like
cool
a good clarification to make, honestly.
What'd you say?
It's a good clarification to make, because you're right. Like that's an extreme sport that requires an extreme training and nutrition plan. It's not meant to be forever.
No,
it just isn't.
Right. I mean, that's why it was cool to have you and I and our different perspectives and backgrounds and everything on this, because it's like, I might slip up one day and say like, oh, well, I would just carb cycle that, I mean, that'd be really easy. But it's like, you have to understand like where I'm coming from with a lot of it too. Like maybe that's not wellness. Maybe that's like a short-term fix, or maybe that's okay. If you really feel like you got to cut carbs to get on your diet because you just got to lose 5 pounds before you can be motivated to get your nutrition right and actually get on your wellness plan. Like, okay, we can do some stuff to take 5 pounds off here and there, right? We can deplete some glycogen. We can get you in the gym, do a little bit more volume, and then we can get on the path. Now, are you going to probably pick those 5 pounds back up? Yeah, probably. But if we can right the train and get on the path from there, okay, sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? Because I know like my mother, for example, has been, she's dieted her whole life. She's where I get some of my size from. She's a bigger lady. She's taller too, though. I mean, my mom's every bit of 5'10". So I think that's where a lot of the height comes from with me and my brothers too, with, me being the short one at 6'4". So she's always dieted, always struggled with this, that, and the other. And I would always talk to her and she'd be like, oh, I'm only eating like 1,200 calories a day. And I'm like, why in the world are you eating 1,200 calories a day? Like my left leg eats 1,200 calories a day. Okay. Like 1,200 calories is not going to get anybody anywhere. And she's like, well, I got to take 5 pounds off or I'm just not going to be motivated. Because if I get to the end of the week and I only lost 1 pound, that's not going to be good enough for me. I need to take 5 pounds off and then I can actually diet properly. And I'm like, well, if mentally that's what you need to do for your mental wellness and you need to see that number on the scale, and then we can actually start to get some stuff in order, maybe I can get behind that. Right. But understand that is not a long-term solution. That is not what you're going to do a whole year.
Right.
No
and a lot of the research on
that long.
Yeah. I mean, for most people, 2 pounds is like the most body fat you can lose in a week. And that's if you're being aggressive. You can see bigger fluctuations, like you said, glycogen, fluid, training load. But yeah, for the long term, the 2 pounds is generally like, that's actually a really good rate of body fat loss. So
yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, you give that 4 weeks and you're down 8 true pounds of fat. And that's not to accommodate or even like factor in any muscle growth you would see in that time. So it'd be pretty darn good.
Right. I think that's a topic for another day, is can you lose fat and build muscle at the same time? Maybe we'll go into that on the next podcast. But we will leave you on that cliffhanger, and I'm going to stop Bailey before she starts arguing with me. But thanks everyone for listening. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope we didn't get too sciencey. And, you know, if we did and it was a little too complicated, feel free to shoot us a question, drop a like below. We will definitely get back to you and try to clarify anything that we said. I know we went in rabbit holes and circles a little bit too. So just feel free to reach out.
Thanks, guys. Eat your moofas. I should have ended with that.
I'm leaving this in, just so you know.
No.